some incredible things today from CEO Ben Hills of Iris. Now, today I learned three really exciting things. The first is buying data, buying behavior has changed dramatically, and that kind of has to change how we respond to RFPs. The second thing is, of course, content management. Now, we've heard a lot about content management changes, but today I learned things that I literally never heard before and will change how I talk about content management in the future. And the third thing is specific steps that we can all take to personalize our responses to win more RFPs. Because, of course, so many of the RFPs nowadays are super generic, but we can do really specific things to personalize them in a way that we just couldn't before. Stay tuned, learn, because I sure learned a ton and I loved this conversation. Hey, Ben, welcome to the Stargazy Brief. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
You have such a long background in proposal writing and responding to RFPs. Like you really know this industry backward and forward. I'm wondering what got you into deciding, hey, I want to build a software. I want to build something that actually helps people respond to RFPs.
Yeah, it's a great question. It was really the new technology in LLM driven software that gave me this light bulb moment that we could finally solve what I thought was the biggest Achilles heel at my previous company in proposal development and RFPs. It's what I like to call a Jetsons era solution to a Flintstones era problem, right? I was starting to transition out of a lot of responsibilities, and it was at that company where I was the sole person responsible for every proposal and RFP. So, and bringing that software to about 1,000 colleges, I did 1,500 or so RFPs and proposals. And so I was both starting to enter this new brain space of thinking about what to do next. And then this new technology became available. And I decided I want to dedicate the rest of my life to bringing to the market the solution that I'd always wish I had had.
Yeah, for those people who are listening who have not been in an ed tech background, I mean, every single bit of revenue just about comes from responding to RFPs. So it's not an easy way, like an easy foray into proposals at all.
No, but it was the most fun part of the job for me. So I was chief operating officer of the company. I did everything from all the demos, managing the sales team, overseeing our product team. I did just about every function of the business. And the most gratifying experiences were when I got to spend time thinking about everything I knew about the college we were working with and everything I knew about our company and how that could get blended together to position our business in a really impactful way. And it's kind of this neat like puzzle that comes together where like you've got like the college's 15-year strategic plan. You've got all of the insights of every conversation you've had with the prospect. You've got the requirements and what they're looking for. And then you've got everything about your business, similar client stories, what's on your roadmap, what your product does. And weaving all of that together is something that just generally brought a lot of enjoyment to me. And also at the time, it felt like every solution out there just didn't speak to me. Like every website was like, you hate RFPs, we get it. Here's a tool to spend less time on them. But as someone who took a lot of pride in having the opportunity to craft a compelling narrative, I was like, it's not that I hate RFPs. Like there's a lot of components that I hate around it, the project management, digging through my Google Drive and all that. But actually, when I get to put pen to paper, it's incredibly gratifying, and it's where I get to put my best thinking cap on. If I felt like these tools weren't speaking to me and they were more dismissive of the RFP process, like it stinks, so we'll make sure you spend as little time as possible. 2/3 of enterprise sales require an RFP or proposal, statement of work, and it's increasing pretty dramatically year over year. And most people think of it just as like government and public sector, but it's actually every industry now. There's $200 billion a year in janitorial supplies that go through RFPs in the US alone.
I do just want to say that the marketing that is out there about RFPs is you're right, is really dismissive towards RFPs, which was such an insane thing to say when more than 50% of revenue for private sector comes in via RFP. And so it's such an important and strategic part of your revenue, whether you love RFPs or not. It's important and really great to get right and to hire people who do love it and don't see it as admin, but strategic. And I love that your marketing specifically does not do that. it's uplifting to the proposal people, but also educational to sales leaders who might not quite understand RFPs. And that goes to my next question, which is because you have been in a very leadership role who has also responded to RFPs, what do you think would be really useful for proposal people to know uh, about leadership and how they see RFPs? Maybe something that we don't see in our peer group that would be really good for us to know when we're talking to leadership about RFPs.
Um, the first thing that I would say is your work doesn't go unnoticed. I think it's really often the case that proposal teams feel like when they lose, they get dinged, and when they win, they sometimes don't even get told they won the deal
Yeah,
by the sales
so
rep,
true.
and they're never recognized.
Yeah.
And I'll say, as someone who sits in board meetings regularly, talks to investors and boards, this work gets bubbled up to the highest levels of a company. Like, we have some investors who reach out to us saying, hey, I have portfolio companies telling me they have an RFP challenge. Could I bring your software to them? So it is really the case that this is some of the most critical work and most critical business process happening at all of these companies. And I think you should use that as proposal leaders as really a vote of confidence on the importance of your business and the importance of what you're doing. Also, most importantly, it's about helping leadership understanding that like this problem isn't going away. And if we solve it the right way, if we think about the right process and the right tech stack and the right approach, then we can use this to our advantage to win. I think we talk to companies all the time that are just seeing an explosion in RFP and proposal as part of their percentage of pipeline. Like, we talked to a company the other day that none of their renewals required an RFP 2 years ago, and half of them required it last year.
Yeah.
So you find businesses where it's just unavoidable. And if you treat it like a problem that no one wants to be a part of solving, the folks who have the best results in proposal teams are the ones that like want to put on their cape and champion being a hero and how this can be used to an advantage for a company. I think the process mapping is just always a good exercise of helping people understand. Like, I don't like to like racy chart teams to death, but it's always helpful to do
Yeah.
that and help people understand where things are involved. And then there's also a whole lot of meta and helping executives better understand their business based on what's happening in RFPs. So I had a customer the other day whose CRO came in and was like, what are buyers looking for based on the RFPs we're responding to? And they went and read through every RFP and mapped out all the questions, and something you can now do with AI really effectively, and see like, hey, there are more buyers looking for this type of function and fewer looking for that type of functionality. And that type of insight is something that executives don't always associate with the proposal and RFP team. But actually, proposal teams have the wealthiest set of knowledge in a business because they are where the rubber meets the road on what buyers' expectations are and whether or not your company can meet that. So you can have the best pitch, the best cold call, the best on-site meeting. But as we all know, what it really comes down to is that set of granular requirements that are needed. And it's proposal teams that have that information. And it's really powerful to unlock that for the rest of their company as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think that kind of ties into something that I really wanted to ask you, which is most proposal teams think of AI as a drafting shortcut. But what do you think are some of the less obvious ways, like the one you just mentioned, that proposal professionals can use AI from capture all the way through post submission that they might not be taking advantage of right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. When you get an RFP, we all know the drill. We print out a bunch of copies. We get 5 people in a war room. We clear our schedules. We read through it. We decide whether or not it's worth our time. Well, we already have AI that can find every requirement inside of the RFP. And we already have AI that has all of our institutional knowledge in one place. And so using AI to connect those dots and give us a really quick signal as to whether or not it's worth our time is a very powerful way to turn the go no go component of capture from a laborious 3 to 5 hour exercise to a quick 30-minute meeting. That's one that I always encourage teams to think about is like increase your top of funnel by quickly deciding whether or not something's worth your time and weeding out the noise that like, because the RFP requires some certificate of insurance you don't have or residency data that you don't have, et cetera. It's just not worth your time, and focus on the ones that you think can win. Then post submission, you actually have to implement that client. And similarly, we all know the drill. You win the RFP, you have a handoff meeting, you get the sales rep, the proposal writer, the customer success manager in a room, and you're like, all right, what do we need to do to make them successful?
Yeah.
And you're like quickly rebuilding context of an RFP you wrote 3, 6, sometimes 12 months prior. That is a really good opportunity to use AI to automatically find every commitment you made inside of that RFP, turn it into a handoff plan. We have a client, Build Ops, that their whole customer success team uses Iris to understand exactly what was promised to the client in the RFP process. And that's something that can just eliminate what's otherwise a standard 30 to 60-minute meeting every time a deal is won
Yeah.
into something that can happen asynchronously. And then even beyond that, some of the insights and reporting we talked about, like how are buyers' expectations shifting based on the questions they're asking us to answer in a proposal and RFP, and how can that help my company make a decision on product roadmap, where we focus geography wise, or we target even security requirements. Like we have clients where they're like, how many people are asking about, does your AI use its data for training a model? Right. And you want to get ahead of those kinds of trends and questions so that everyone in your company can have a better sense of what they should do. And so when you think about that whole process from, is it worth our time responding to it? Can we get to a higher quality draft? Can we implement the client successfully? And what can we learn from winning or losing? AI can play a role in connecting all of those dots from a context standpoint. And more than anything, bringing all of those stakeholders involved. A company exists to deliver a solution that customers want to pay for, then find more customers like that. This process impacts every decision a company makes. And AI plays a really critical role in helping teams not just get there faster, but also get there with a much higher fidelity. The last one that I always like to call out is like project management. We look at a lot of customers and they show us their standard operating procedures for RFP processes. And they like create a dedicated Slack channel and have a weekly Zoom meeting. And like there's oftentimes like 10 hours that sometimes the sales rep is doing per RFP process, just in like notifying stakeholders and nudging people on deadlines and building context. Someone's like, I have one question to answer, but I don't know any context on the RFP. And that project management is something that a lot of agentic AI that can take on sending those reminders and notifications and sending deadline follow-ups. And it sounds really basic, but when compounded over the course of multiple processes, it can save teams over 10 hours a week just in not having to do that follow-up.
Yeah, and it's so nice when the SMEs can get annoyed at the agentic AI and not at the human who's reminding them.
There's a huge component of that. And like, look, I wouldn't lose sight of the cultural impact that putting AI in the middle can have.
Yeah.
We have customers who have told us, I used to spend every pipeline meeting hearing frustrations and friction between teams because the sales rep feels bad nudging the CTO needing follow up, but they're also being told they need the answers to win the deal and so on and so forth. And like, you know what? Iris doesn't feel bad sending those notifications and reminders. And so
It's not
put the
brain
AI in
social
the middle.
capital. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And let the team spend more time working together.
Yeah. No, I love that. Okay, so helps with the qualification much faster, smarter. It helps with the customer success handoff. It helps with the project management with agentic AI, like you just mentioned, and also seeing the trends. Like what are people asking for? What do we need to be building now or working on now? You talk with so many teams who are responding to RFPs, so I'm wondering if there are like a top 2 to 3 mistakes that you're seeing people make that they really don't have to, and the AI can help them with.
Yeah, I mean, one, to your point, like everyone makes mistakes. It's going to happen. I had a story that broke my heart where a salesperson got fired because they submitted an RFP and there was a requirement on having it notarized and they missed it. And their boss was like, that's sloppy. You're out of here. In fact, companies tend to report that 20% of the RFPs they start, they never even end up finishing or submitting because they get to the finish line and realize there's a requirement for like CPA verified financial statements or postmarked in weddings, something like that. The very first RFP I submitted had to be burned on a CD-ROM and signed with a Sharpie and mailed to someone, right? So I think one is just make sure you have all your I's dotted and T's crossed and that you're keeping that list of like, not the solution requirements, but the tactical requirements of when the dust settles and the hard part's done, the meat of the proposal is written. do I actually know how to submit this and get this somewhere? I've flown to college campuses in Alabama that required the RFP to be hand delivered, right? Like you have to know when it's done how it's going to actually get there. The other, which is a little bit less tactical but more cultural, a lot of teams enter the RFP process with their arms folded, assuming they're going to lose. For a very long time, the prevailing notion was if the RFP wasn't baked for you, it wasn't worth your time responding to, and you never win. And I cannot stress enough how quickly that is changing in the B2B landscape. It is no longer the case that an RFP is issued with a predetermined winner. It is very much the case that RFPs are hyper competitive. Sometimes there's no sales cycle other than an RFP. We have clients all the time telling us they respond to 5 RFPs with prospects they've never met, and they won 2 of them because prospects are genuinely looking for the best solution. And so when you enter the RFP process, just assuming you're not going to win it, you're setting up a really bad culture for failure. When you enter the process assuming every RFP is a chance to speak directly to our buyer, get their attention, talk about our solution and why we're the best, then you will increase your win rate.
Okay, I'm gonna dive into that one.
Let's dive in.
'Cause yeah, I've been in this world, and I do see a less than 5% 5% win rate when we don't meet with the buyer before we submit an RFP, and I haven't seen that change. So, but I do have really specific suggestions to people who do wanna still respond to those RFPs and how to kind of flip that into a more of a possibility of winning or seeing if it is genuinely not meant for them. But I'm wondering what your take is. Like, is it specific types of industries, maybe AI or software where that's changing? Are you doing something specific to make it win, or do you think it's just the buying behavior is different?
Yeah, so from a macro level, the buying behavior is definitely changing. And I think there are a few things fueling it. One is a lot of companies bought a lot of software during the pandemic era on like 3-year contracts, and those are now expiring. And the result of that is a lot of buyers now coming up and saying, okay, we tried some tool in some place for the first time. We don't know that we want to go with it again, but we now have a much better sense of what we're looking for. So we can craft a really high degree of qualification requirements that we want. There's also a shifting trend where as buyers have more options, they actually want to spend less time in individual sales cycles. And so when you're inundated with not just 5 good solutions, but 50, you might not want to sit in 50 discovery calls, 50 stakeholder meetings. And so you start with an RFP to then down select who you're going to do presentations with, POCs with, and move into a later cycle. Another third trend on that is generative AI is actually leading to more companies issue RFP. Issuing an RFP used to be such a laborious process that most people didn't really want to deal with it. But you now can go and, like, truthfully, you can go to ChatGPT and say, I don't like my payroll provider. Here are 3 things I don't like about it. Here's a little bit about my company. What are 150 questions I should put on an RFP to find a new provider? And because it's so easy to issue an RFP, we're seeing a lot more businesses issue them for not just the few massive large purchases, but even smaller purchases to help find who will put their best foot forward and who will really take the time to craft a narrative. And that component of taking the time to craft a narrative is more important than ever. I spoke with a CEO who had one of their biggest clients come up for renewal. I've been using them for 5 years, and called him and said, look, your team sent back one-word answers. Your competitors who we've never met put time into crafting highly detailed responses that spoke directly to our business. How can I justify to my team not giving these other vendors a shot? I mean, we have a client in the transportation management industry. 98% of their revenue flows through RFPs today, and it was 0% 3 years ago. And some of that's an industry that's actually just now adopting technology. Many industries are still just moving to the cloud for the first time now, let alone adopting AI. And so as industries move online, they're just turning to RFPs as a procurement vehicle of choice.
Gotcha. No, that's really interesting because I know a lot of the times, especially with marketing, and I don't know if it is just AI marketing in general, but proposal teams are being really pushed to respond faster. as though, like, that's the important thing over winning.
Yeah, it's the holy grail question for people
Yeah,
building and
give us the silver
proposal
bullet.
managers. So yeah, exactly. When it comes to proposal teams striking the balance, expectation setting and transparency is a huge component. If proposal teams shared more transparency in how far along in the process they are with an RFP, staged out the phases of their process, if they helped get buy-in on like why it's not about getting this done as quickly as possible, it's about getting it done right, I think that they could help strike the balance of quality is probably more important than speed. Security is the biggest place where this comes up, where we often hear that short one-word responses to security reviews leads to more red flags being raised that lead to elongated deal cycles where they're like, whoa, this is so short. I'm now more nervous about your company. We need to set up a meeting between your CISO and our CISO. And like,
Yeah.
you might add 2 extra weeks to the sales cycle because you didn't spend 2 extra hours including more depth. And so I think security is a huge one where we preach like, yeah, you want to get it back expeditiously, but not with haste. And that's really important too. I will say, as someone who's responded to 15 RFPs in the past month for companies looking to buy RFP software, one of the things they're actually judging vendors on is how quickly they get it back, because that's indicative of how good your software is. And so I'm not going to pretend like speed isn't important, but if it got back to them fast and was poorly written, it wouldn't win either. I know it's not anywhere close to a silver bullet answer, how to strike the balance of speed and quality, but I think important is like expectation setting on process and even doing some qualification up front. Like, is this one that we should create new content for because there's some good strategic value and reason? Or is this one that speed is the most important factor and quality is a little bit less relevant? And that's just different for every business.
Yeah, gotcha. I've been asked multiple times just in the past year to submit something 2 weeks ahead of time to prove how quick we were. And I'll be honest with you, I've always pushed back because I could see that the procurement people weren't even opening up the submission until the day of. So what was the point? But if we can then spend like a week or 2 more making it hyper personalized to that customer, really wow them with how well we know them, to me that would be makes so much more sense to do as opposed to doing it faster. But maybe that's not always true based on what you're saying.
I think your point on personalization should trump generic boilerplate speed is certainly true. I think, it's up to us as vendors to compress that 2 weeks of personalization and think to ourselves, like, what's happening in those 2 weeks and how can that happen faster? Recognizing it's never going to be like click of a button, I don't read it and I just click send. It is interesting to think about where you can maybe not get it back to them an hour later. Maybe it's 2 days later, not 2 weeks later, but still with the level of personalization that would happen if you spent a few weeks on it. And I do think AI plays a lot of critical roles in helping compress those timelines that allow proposal leaders to spend their best time in the best places, crafting something really bespoke for every prospect.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely more possible now. 12 months ago, I don't feel like that was as possible. I think going forward that will change and it's just obviously proposal AI, I need a proposal tech. Keeping up with that will make all the difference for the proposal teams, the sales teams responding to those RFPs. And I think the ones that are using either more legacy technology or none at all are going to be left behind quite a bit.
I completely agree. One of the biggest underlying AI components that's just enabled this in the past 12 months is foundational model improvements on two key points. One is context window, and the other is on reasoning and comprehension. So, like a year ago, the best models couldn't generate multiple pages based on dozens of artifacts. They could only actually keep top of mind, so to speak, for an LLM, what they call a context window, very small amount of information. So you weren't getting what you were getting out of it didn't feel very personalized. That shifted quite a bit. The other reason is because of all foundational models now coalescing around this mixture of expert and reasoning sort of concept where all of the research shows that when you give LLMs hyper specific personas, it actually unlocks different hyperparameters in their training data and generates much different types of output. So when you say you're an expert in security, you're an expert in this industry, you know everything about it, it's not that it hallucinates, it's that it actually surfaces to the top of its context much more relevant information that helps generate much more personalized and granular proposal content. So anyway, not to get too derailed on the technical side of things, but
No, I think a lot of people listening to this podcast are obsessed with that stuff, so you're good.
I could go as
Um,
deep as you want on that.
well, I mean, it goes to the next thing I'm thinking about, which is about content, because obviously content management for proposals has changed so dramatically. I think probably almost more than anything else within proposals. And everyone is talking about building the single source of truth. And I think still most knowledge bases fall apart after 6 months just because the content gets stale, people don't update it. I want to know from you what practical approaches people use now to make their knowledge bases like modern and awesome
Yeah.
and work.
Yeah. Yeah. So this was like the original thesis for Iris 2, which was like, instead of relying on recycling my past proposal, I need to write content based on my most up to date, what we call like primary source content, right? Like my business changes all the time. So by the time I'm writing my next proposal, my last one's already outdated. I want to use my latest case studies, my latest blog posts, my latest release notes, my latest product roadmap, all of that. And so part of it is just like doing a whiteboard exercise and mapping out where that information lives, recognizing, to your point of single source of truth, the goal should not be that where you write your proposal is the source of the information. Because as proposal leaders, we're working in every other team's tools, right? I have to go into my engineering team tool to understand whether or not we have a feature. I have to go to my marketing team's tool to understand case studies. And the goal shouldn't be to move those teams into your proposal tool. It should be to pull information like at runtime from those tools. What we do a lot of is mapping exercise around where that information originates and then who owns those connections. And so we'll have someone from the product team own the connection between Confluence and Iris, and they're the one responsible for making sure that Iris has access to latest release notes, latest roadmap information, so on and so forth. Similar with marketing, like you want to own where the marketing content originates and then assign an owner to make sure that that is staying up to date in Iris. So that mapping exercise is totally new for companies because they're used to static knowledge bases that are just repositories of links to Google Docs or past proposals, et cetera. But once you do it, you then have a pretty good ownership matrix of where the information lives, where it should live, and how that gets fed into proposals. I think that what that looks like over time is much more self-aware knowledge bases, like very small example, highlight contradictory knowledge for people. And we can show this source says you have this many customers and that source says you have that many customers. There can only be one right answer. And I think there's going to be a lot of that over time. Like when proposal leaders change product names, how do they bulk update that in their knowledge system and how that happens with proposals? And I think AI is enabling a lot of that to happen much more seamlessly and much more effectively as well.
Yeah. So we have this single source of truth living where it should live, probably outside the proposal management tool. And then we bring that into our responses. How do we then create a really personalized response that really stands out? Because of AI, a lot of people are using it poorly and responding to as many RFPs as they can, as quickly as they can. And so a lot of those proposals are really generic. And so what can we do to stand out and wow the people who are reading our responses?
Yeah. The term that has been going around a lot lately that I love is what people call context engineering. And so like prompt engineering, as we know, is like respond to this RFP and make it persuasive, right? And like you said, you'll get something like generic and fluffy, and it's not going to be that personalized. But context engineering says, how do we bring the most relevant context into those prompts? And that has proven in so much research to dramatically alter the outputs and personalization. So think about it. When you're selling to a prospect, you know a lot about them, the industry they're in, their type of company size, the role of the person you're selling to, their goals, their apprehensions, what competitors you're going up against. Often it lives in the CRM. Sometimes it lives in call transcripts with the prospect. But when all of that context comes together, it can lead an AI system not just to write different responses, but also to surface different institutional knowledge, right? So when I was in selling to higher education, if I'm selling to a large public state university versus a small rural liberal arts college, I want to use different client examples. I want to position the ROI differently. I want to pull different institutional knowledge and shape that to create a different narrative. And all of that is based on the context that's handed off in between what we know about our prospects, what they're looking for, and everything that my business does.
So if I'm a proposal person today, I'm using a proposal software. Maybe it doesn't do that very well yet. It just kind of shoots out that generic info. But what can I do? Is there any way I can use AI differently to personalize?
It's interesting. And I think that probably speaks to some of the earlier point of like the bifurcation between tools whose goal is automation and tools whose goal is quality of content. Our North Star is quality of content. Yes, you're going to save time, but really you're going to win more business because it's higher quality. Of course, I would say you should check out Iris. As far as if you're not and
Yeah.
you're going to use something like ChatGPT, yeah, I mean you could take the output from proposal tool A, put it into ChatGPT and say, here's 15 things to know about the prospect it's going to, and you would see a different kind of response. Now that's like ephemeral, right? Like if you're doing that in ChatGPT, your system's not getting smarter over time. It's not learning from that. It's not using that aggregate context to improve in the way a system like Iris is, but it might help you in that one-off proposal scenario. There's also the upstream component of like, what can we learn about our prospect? There's a proposal leader at a company who told me she watched every call between the prospect and their sales team before writing a proposal. And she could get in their head and figure out like, they're really nervous about adopting this new tech. So I'm going to spend more time talking about our implementation services. And they're not very tech savvy. So I'm going to dumb down my language in the technical section and use more analogies instead of speaking directly, right? That kind of context can so dramatically shape the level of personalization. And it's not just that it makes it more relevant, it's that that relevancy shines through to the buyer. And when the buyer reads something that feels like this was written for me, they understand me, that's how you can win a deal, even if it wasn't baked for you from the start.
I I know like a lot of really good proposal people, that is what they do. And it used to take us 2 days to go through all of that information. It was worth it because you would win, right? So, I love that AI does kind of speed that up, but still provides us with a lot of great content. Um,
And you
go
can
ahead.
develop your standardized like prompting and infrastructure on how to do that, right? So like
Yeah.
once you do it a few times manually, you can then instill your best practices to happen automatically every time a call happens, every time there's a transcript. Here's the information that's relevant, here's what's useful. And so it's a little bit of manual work up front to then have something that can happen in a continuous and ongoing manner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really speaks to how the proposal management role is really changing currently. And I know you don't have a crystal ball, Ben, but if you did, what do you think the proposal managers and writers role will look like in a year from now if they were to really lean into what AI can do to help them?
Yeah. So, one, I think the biggest component is pipeline coverage. We can only work directly with the sales team on a small percentage of proposals that are deemed high priority and high dollar. And the vast majority, we have to use our boilerplate, not in a derogatory way, but like our off
Yeah.
the shelf proposal template. But we all know that if we could put in that level of effort to put our best foot forward in 100% of our proposals, we'd win more business and we'd have more happy customers. And so I think the biggest component is going to be how do we as proposal leaders actually measure that pipeline coverage? This is also part of the exec and leadership buy-in is like, hey, I can only help on 5% today, but if I could expand that to 100% with the right tooling, we know we'd win more business. And I think that's going to be a huge component is how do we use this subject matter expertise across our entire sales pipeline? One of the most untapped opportunities for proposal leaders is to help their CTO and CPO and CEO and CFO and everyone else in the business understand how buyers' perspectives are changing. And as proposal leaders, we're the ones reading everything that they're looking for. Like we can do some of that pattern gathering. We can do some of that almost like grassroots aggregating of information and really use that to help our businesses make smart decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you suggest are the 1 to 2 things that they can start right away to really enhance what they're doing now, whether it's with AI or whatever it is to win more RFPs?
Other than trying out Iris, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Um, I think there are two things that I recommend to people. One is go back to first principles of what the ingredients for a best proposal is. Go back to what are the true pieces of context across my business, the client interactions, the marketing materials, the product information, whatever it is that when brought together could create the absolute best winning proposal. And then map out how that comes to life and map out which systems it lives in, where things take a lot of time, where things are happening manually that could happen automatically, and start to create this vision of here's how good it is when we do it the right way, and here's how we can do it the right way at scale more frequently. And when it comes to AI, it's a combination of using a lot of tools, right? The tool you use to unearth buyer insights from a call transcript might be different than what you use to draft the proposal and so on and so forth. But I think the biggest notion is everyone in AI rushed to time savings and like, how do I do less tedious work? But the best implementations of AI are how do I do work that otherwise doesn't scale more frequently and at scale? And writing a high quality proposal is one of the absolute best examples of that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I feel like there is so much to just take away from this conversation and probably a lot that we all could learn from you. So I'm wondering, where can we find you if we want to learn about you and your thoughts? If we want to learn about Iris, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, check out Iris at irispro.ai. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I respond to every message. I'm always happy to help. If you have a proposal, an RFP due that you want to try out, I know a lot of people are getting toward holiday season and thinking about how they don't want to spend their holidays on end of quarter RFPs, and we can get you implemented and launched. And I'll work with you on your first proposal or RFP in Iris, and you can do it for free.
And yeah, thank you so much, Ben. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.